right, so I hope that this week you got some time to read the Gospel of Matthew. And when you read the Gospel of Matthew, I hope that you tried to read it not like it was a biography of Jesus, but you tried to read it like it was a story. Some of you tried that. How did it feel when you read it as a story? Different in what way?
There was a lot more flow, and actually I think like I grasped things that I had seen it so much.
Yeah, there's a flow to it. You get things that you hadn't seen before. You see the interplay going on with the Sadducees and Pharisees and how Jesus is trying to say what it takes to be a disciple. Now, I would suggest to you that this week you try to read it again as a story. And I think our default reading, it's not wrong to read them in other ways, but I think the default reading of all the Gospels should be to try to read them as story. This week, though, I want you to try to read Matthew, if you can get hold of a version called The Message. Okay, now The Message is very interesting to read. And if those of you that have electronic Bibles, if you go to the U version, you can download The Message for free on that. Read it in that version, and it just blows you away. I'm going to quote from that a little bit today when we get into Matthew 11. Because there's a few other things. I told you we're going to spend some time with Matthew. But there's a few other things that we got to get to. Also, some of you had asked if I would set up tables because you're trying to take notes. You're welcome to sit at the tables if you want to take notes. If you don't want to take notes, some people, I always took notes in college. You know what? I can't read my own writing. So when I would take my notes, I found out that I remembered things better when I took notes. But I never went back and read them again because I couldn't. I did go back and look at them, however, and I could tell exactly when I was falling asleep. Because my notes would be going along and you could almost read the writing, and then they would just taper down and fall off the page. Just a line going down off the page, and I'd go, oh man, that's where I fell asleep and I missed the whole thing. Hopefully this morning you won't fall asleep. Let me ask you another question. When you were reading Matthew, did it help you to know that there were 5 sort of parts where he's doing the teaching? Remember last week we talked about there's 5 teaching sections in Matthew. And the most important of those sections, I believe, is right in the middle in chapter 13. Now we're going to get to that and deal with that, but I'm not going to let you deal with that today because it's too soon for you to deal with that. We got to get one more thing in our mind before we go there. All right, so let's talk about Matthew today. Remember that he's talking to a specific group. Usually we don't think of the Gospels that way. We should. Because the other books, when we study them, we always say, well, who is this really addressed to? Matthew's community that he is in, and remember I told you I don't really think that Matthew wrote this book. I don't think Matthew the apostle wrote this book. I think that it was written about 80 AD. I think Matthew was already dead. I think that a Jewish man who had been close to Matthew wrote the book. Now some of you are looking at me in astonishment because you know your Bible says the gospel according to Matthew. But you know who put that gospel according to Matthew on there were people after the book was written. So I'm not, now it was very early, but they put that on there. Matthew's community. This Jewish man was living where? In a Jewish community. His book is addressed to a Jewish community as a Jew. Now think of the Jews in 80 AD. You got to get a sense of this community. You got to be with where Matthew is. In 80 AD, this is after 70 AD. We know that. We're good with numbers, right? But 70 AD is a critical number for us to always remember when we're reading Scripture, especially New Testament. What happened in 70? Jerusalem was destroyed. The Romans had finally had enough with this troublesome province, and they decided to just annihilate Jerusalem. And they did exactly that. They destroyed it, they took it apart, they demolished it, they were through with it. I mean, they had a siege of 2 years on the city because they weren't going to lose any soldiers doing this. They just surrounded the city and let the people starve to death, and finally it was over. And then the Romans came in and destroyed everything. Makes sense. So in 70 AD, you're a Jew. You can't be a Jew anymore because you have no temple. You feel like you've lost your identity. But you've accepted Christ. So you're still living in a Jewish community. You still call yourself a Jew, but now you're a Christian. When you're living as a Christian, but still thinking of yourself in that Jewish culture, you want to know, has my culture disappeared? Matthew's going to tell them, you can still be a Jew and still be a Christian. Now you need to keep that in mind. You can still be a Jew and still be a Christian. It's most important that you be a Christian. That's why Matthew tells his story the way he does. When he's talking to them, Matthew 11 is going to be our key passage today. And I'm going to just go down to verse 28, and I'm reading out of the Message here. Matthew 11:28. You'll recognize this as a whole different thing because it's so familiar to you that that's the problem with Matthew. It's so familiar to you, you don't see what's being said. Are you tired? Are you burned out? Worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Now, I know that our default position is always to say, what is the Bible telling me about this? Don't do that. That's the last thing you should be doing. The first thing you should be doing is, why did Matthew record Jesus saying this? And what was he trying to say? What's he trying to get across to those people in 80 AD about Jesus? See, you see, it's a different mindset I'm reading this through. I'm trying to read it through Matthew's eyes. Why is this man, this Jewish man, telling people, are you burned out on religion? What religion had they had? They'd had Judaism. What had that Judaism been doing to them? It had been telling them, if you follow these rules, then you will have life. And what had happened to that Jewish religion? It had been destroyed. It has just been destroyed by the Romans. Their whole temple is gone. Where is God? That's what they're asking. So they're going, are you burned out on religion? Come to me. That's why Matthew remembers this. Yeah, Jesus said it long before. But Matthew records it for us because he's saying, you need to come to Jesus now. Come with me and what? You'll recover your life. What's happened to your life? All the culture you held dear has disappeared. I'll show you. You want rest? I'll show you how to take a real rest. Watch how I do it. Now, if there's any theme that I'm trying to follow in this class, this is it. I want to be a disciple of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus, I need to watch how Jesus does it. How does he live life? And life, frankly, I'm going to tell you, life can be good at times, but it can be really messy. You're going to have, if you live very long, you're going to have all kinds of problems in life. I do. That's just life. So when you face life, what he's saying is, Jesus says, I face life, watch how I lived life, how I fit my beliefs and my religion into my daily life. That's what I want us to do in this class. Now, unfortunately, the King James Version took this passage, and let's look at this passage in your Bibles. Go to Matthew 11, and let me show you what the NIV says so you can be familiar with it, and then I'll tell you what King James did to it. NIV says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Here's what King James did to that. Instead of saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and learn from me," King James said, "Take my yoke and learn of me." Now, I'd argue that's a terrible translation. I think King James, those people did a great job, but "learn of me" is a terrible translation. Because you know what we do when we think of "learn of me"? What do you do when it says, "I want to learn of Jesus"? I want to learn about him. I want to make him a fact. What is Jesus really saying here? Don't make me a fact. Do what?
Make it personal.
Make it personal. Watch how I do it. Watch how I live life, how I take religion and make it work in my life. Now, I've got to tell you that there's a large number of people today that say the Bible is useless. You know why they say that? Because they've tried to take the way they read the Bible, and some of them have read the Bible. They try to take what they read about the Bible, and they find that really it doesn't have meaning to them. That's sad. Because I want you to see that Jesus showed them a way to look at the Bible that would have meaning to them. Let's go to Matthew 5:17. Go ahead and turn there. Now, I should tell you, just glance around Matthew 5:17 in your Bible. Glance around. Tell me what section we're in. We're in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, isn't it interesting that only Matthew has a Sermon on the Mount? Now, Luke has a Sermon on the Plain where some things, half of what's in Matthew is in his Sermon on the Plain. So you know what we usually do? We go, well, was he on a mount or in the plain? You know what? In Matthew's story, he's on the mount. Why does he have to be on the mountain? Because Matthew is trying to tell people of his time, he's trying to tell these followers that Jesus is Moses 2.0. I'm talking in computer lingo. Right? Matthew's point is Jesus is the new Moses. Why does Matthew make that point? Because who is he talking to? Jews. Who had the Jews been following all their lives? Moses. What does Matthew have to do to convince them to follow Jesus? That Jesus is the new Moses. If they can believe that Jesus is the new Moses, then they will accept what's being said to them. So, why does he have the law of Jesus being delivered from the mountain? Because that's exactly where Moses got the law from. Do you see the picture here? In fact, if you want to get technical about it and you start reading, and I'm just going to touch on next week. Why does Moses have people follow the star to Jesus? Who followed a bright star to the promised land? Not a bright star, a pillar of light. The Jews. Do you see the picture that Matthew is painting? He's saying Jesus is the new Moses. Get that, Jews? What happened to the laws of Moses? He said, you still need to follow the laws of Moses. That's going to surprise you that I just said that. Matthew says you still need to follow the laws of Moses, because that's exactly what Jesus says. You don't need to think Paul here. I'll get into that later. But I want you to look at this. So we're in the Beatitudes, on the Sermon on the Mount, the way Matthew puts it. And he's talking about the law of Moses. And I want you to look at this. He says, in Matthew 5:17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the least stroke of a pen will disappear from the law until it's accomplished. Now wait a minute. I think the earth is still here, don't you? So did Jesus say the law of Moses is still important? You bet he did. Is it still important to us? You bet it is. Verse 19, anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Verse 20, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. What were the Pharisees trying to do? They were trying to follow the letter of the law. Now, he's going to continue that thought. Unfortunately, we usually read the Beatitudes without this thought in our mind. Now, look what he says. You have heard it said to the people, do not murder. I tell you, anyone who is angry is subject to judgment. Did Jesus just say, murder people? No, he said, you've heard it said, don't murder. What did Jesus do to the law of murder? He just said, that's still in effect. But what are you called to? You're called to a higher standard. You got to go beyond the law of Moses. You're called to a higher standard. You can't even think about murdering your brother. Let's go to the next one. Verse 27. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. Is that one of the laws? You bet. Does Jesus say don't follow the law? No. He says, I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Look at the next one. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must get a certificate of divorce. Is that in the law? Well, yeah, sort of. Not in the Ten Commandments, but it's in the law. What does he say? He says you can't even get a certificate. He says, verse 33, what about oaths? You've heard it said, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you made to the Lord. I tell you, don't swear at all. Don't make any oaths. Verse 38, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Verse 43, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, when you read these in this light, What has Jesus said you must do?
You have to deal with your heart.
You have to deal with your heart. Jesus is talking about your heart. And notice how he interprets that law of Moses. Now, I realize that some of you are thinking, but Kim, what does Paul say about the law of Moses in Colossians? What I'm telling you is Paul is writing to a different group of people under different circumstances. Jesus is writing to the Jews. Think of this as if you're a Jew and you have become a Christian, and now somebody says to you, the law of Moses no longer applies to you. You've wasted your life trying to follow the law of Moses. God just made that up as a sorry joke for you. That doesn't go over well with you, does it? You notice what Matthew's saying. Your life has not been wasted trying to follow and understand the law of Moses. That is what God wants. God doesn't want us to murder people. God doesn't want us to commit adultery. God doesn't want us to lie. Yes, but you need to go to a higher standard. You see, Jesus is Moses 2.0. This is the law. I've come to fulfill the law, but I haven't come to end it. So in this view, to these people, Matthew's saying, the law of Moses is still in effect. But what had the Pharisees done wrong with the law? They'd made it a checklist. And remove the heart. Exactly. They've made it a checklist and remove the heart. Now let me tell you what to me is the very, very sad thing of ways that I have read the Bible in the past. I've made the Bible a checklist and removed the heart. And that is wrong. Because you know what I'm reading the Bible like? I'm reading the Bible like a Pharisee. God help me to not read the Bible like a Pharisee. Now, when Jesus says, watch how I do it, let's watch how Jesus applies some of these things to the people he is with. Let's go to Matthew 12. Notice I'm always staying in Matthew today, so you don't need to be flipping around too far, because I told you we were going to spend some time with Matthew. We aren't spending, with others. Now look how that comes out when you're reading Matthew 12. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. The Pharisees saw this and said to them, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." Are the Pharisees correct? Absolutely. It is unlawful to do that. Look what Jesus says. He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only the priests." He goes on, he says, "I tell you, one greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Now, there's several things in there that we just got to think about for a minute. First off, what did Jesus say about the law? I can break the law for a reason. What reason did he break it for? He's the Lord, but he also said, watch how I do it. He read that scripture, he knew that scripture existed, and then he chastises the Pharisees. It's not just that he's the Lord, and that's the way we kind of want to say he's the Lord. Can I do this too? I'm going to say we can do this too. Look what he says to the Pharisees. Why do you suppose that Matthew, who is the only one who includes this, says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice"? Who's he talking to here? He's talking especially to the Pharisees, right? They're the ones that are there addressing him. He says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," to this group of Pharisees. What are the Pharisees good at? They're good at following the rules and doing the sacrifices exactly the right way. What are they bad at? Showing mercy. What was the problem here? His disciples were really hungry. What did Jesus do? He took care of them, right? Did that require violating the law? Yes. They violated the law to take care of people. That is really interesting to me. Now you got to think about this and digest it a minute, right? Well, let's go to the next little case from there. Go on to verse 9. Going on from that place, he went to their synagogue. A man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Well, of course, what is the answer to that? No, it's not. But look what he does. Jesus tells him a parable. Usually we just pull this parable out of context and we don't realize what it's really applying to. If any of you has a sheep and it falls into the pit on the Sabbath, won't you take it and lift it out? What's he just said? If your sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Now, do you have to pull it out of the pit? Of course. Is that legal? No. What do? You pull it out anyway. So he says, you're going to pull it out, right? And he goes, how much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore, Jesus says, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Now, nowhere in the law of Moses does it say it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Jesus just says that because of the logic. It's okay to do good on the Sabbath. He went to the man, he said, stretched out your hand. He stretched it out. He was completely restored, just as sound as the other. Now look at the Pharisees' reaction. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Why did this bug them so much? It made them look bad because they are the ones who are following the rules. And what did Jesus do? He just broke a rule because the man had a shriveled hand and Jesus saw that he could heal it. And what did he do? He healed it.
He's also in a synagogue, which means there's other people around.
Oh, man. Yeah, he's in the synagogue. He's embarrassing them there. There's all kinds of things that are going on here. I want you to, you can't, so I won't challenge you to do this. I will tell you that Jesus had a default reaction. He always condemned sin, right? He always condemned sin in strong terms. But what did he do to the sinner? What did he do to the disciples who had to have food? What did he do to the man whose hand was shriveled, who shouldn't have even asked him for help? What's his default reaction to anyone who is sinning? His default reaction is mercy. Is mercy. To every person in the Bible, in any gospel that you read, Jesus never belittles, humiliates, browbeats, or in other ways mistreats people who would be considered by all to be sinful children of the covenant. He does not condone their sinful actions, but he does treat them with mercy and compassion. I am arguing that God's laws are perfect and the law of Moses is good. This is according to Matthew's viewpoint. But God's laws are not made of steel. They are made of mercy and compassion. Now, this is a difficult thing for us to get because we love to follow rules. Rules make life simple. But if our default reaction to dealing with people is to be merciful and to be kind, then we are watching how Jesus does it. Every single time, Jesus, our mentor, is merciful and compassionate toward sinners. Now, I'm going to tell you, there is a group that he is not merciful and compassionate toward. Right? Who is that group?
People who think they have the answer.
The people who think they have the answers. He has nothing good to say about them. I kind of want you to go to Matthew 18. And I'm going to pick up in about, verse 23. We'll get the whole story. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven, remember Matthew's term, kingdom of heaven, is the same as kingdom of God. So I'm going to read it kingdom as God, because otherwise you're thinking of some future place. Matthew is not thinking of a future place here. Matthew is thinking of how we behave today in God's kingdom. If you are in God's kingdom, it's like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed 10,000 talents was brought to him. He wasn't able to pay. The master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. But the servant fell on his knees before him. "Be patient with me," he begged. "I will pay back everything." The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back." But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went to their master and told their master everything that had happened. The master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said, "I have canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers until he could pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will teach each of you unless you forgive your brother from the heart. Now, let's think of that. How does that apply? In that parable, who is the master? Well, God is. And who's the servant to whom much has been given? Well, we are, but especially the Pharisees. They understood, they'd studied the Word of God, they knew exactly what it said. And then what do? They go out to the people who don't fully understand everything, who are the common people. And what do the Pharisees demand of them? That you behave exactly in this way, or I can't forgive you. And what does Jesus say? I've had it. I've had it with these people. Right? We've got to be like that. We've got to be not like the Pharisees. And that means we have to deal with compassion and forgiveness to everyone who we view as sinful. This is hard. Right? Because it's hard to deal with compassion and forgiveness unless you can separate the sin from the sinner. Go to Matthew 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Look at what he says here. This verse is so packed. It's so packed because look at what he says. He says, you have neglected the more important matters of the law. You mean the law has levels? You see, we are into Paul's thinking, which is not what Matthew is. Paul, talking to a different group, says, if you sin, you're a sinner. Matthew tells us that Jesus said there are levels here. What were the Pharisees doing? He's saying they are talking about how many feet you can walk on the Sabbath day. And what should they have been concentrating on? What good they can do on the Sabbath day. On justice, mercy, and forgiveness. Jesus is saying, it's important. It's important that you follow the law. He doesn't say don't follow the law. He says follow the law. But what do you add to it? You add justice, mercy, forgiveness. You've neglected that. You've strained at a gnat and you've swallowed a camel. What's the camel they swallowed? The camel they swallowed was they failed to be merciful. What's the gnat they're straining at? The details of the law. Now I've got to tell you, I've been guilty in my life of this. And I probably still am. Because it's easy for us to say, man, when I read the law, I read that, well, let me take one that's non-controversial, okay? Instrumental music. It's not controversial to us anymore because we all know the answer now, right? But we would say, man, unless you worship God correctly, unless you do the right things on Sunday, then you are going to hell. Wow. We have strained at a gnat and swallowed a camel. Now, I think we understand now that instrumental music is okay. I prefer not to have most instrumental music, but that's my preference. And that's different. We want to take little details. We want to take even parts of the law and say, we have to deal with mercy. Let me tell you one that's controversial. I don't know if I want to get in trouble, but I will. Controversial today would be baptism. Now, I would tell you that I see the way I read Scripture and the way I see it, I think you need to be baptized. Okay? But I know people who read the same Scripture I do and have a different view that makes logical sense, where they say, you don't have to be baptized. And they're still out doing good works. And you know what I need to be? I need to be merciful. I need to explain my position to them when I can. I've got to be merciful. I can't impose my laws and my reading on people. I can teach them. I can care about them. I can love them. These are hard things for us to deal with because we're watching how Jesus dealt with life. It would have been easier for him to say to the Pharisees, yes, we follow the law. I am not going to let my disciples eat today. Let them starve to death. That would have been easy. He didn't do that. He made a point of saying there are weightier matters.
In the first part of Matthew 23 there, it says, "So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do. For they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them." We're supposed to work with compassion and help to lift that burden from people, not put it on them.
And when you read that in 23, what Georgia just read was 23, 1 through 4. Jesus is saying, yeah, obey these people that are telling you what the law is, but go beyond it. We are called to a higher calling. When you read the Bible this way, when you read Matthew especially this way, because you're talking to the same group then. When you're reading Paul, he's addressing a different group with a whole different problem. There they were dealing with a whole bunch of Gentiles, and they're wondering, do I have to convert to Judaism to be a Christian? Paul addresses that. Matthew points this out and really tries to drive it home to us. I'm talking to you Jews. To be a Christian now, you Jews do not have to give up your culture. You should still follow the laws of Moses. But you need to put on them mercy and make the laws not made of steel, but made of mercy. This is hard for us because, you see, we want to read the Bible in only one way, don't we?
Yeah, I'm a recovering Pharisee also. And I think that a big part of my issue is that most of the time it's more important for me to be right than to be merciful. And I think that's what religious people often tend to do. I'm more invested in being right than being merciful.
Isn't that the truth? We want to be right. And you know, when I finally said to myself, I don't have to be right. I want to study the scriptures and I want to know what God says, but I don't have to even be right. I need to see mercy in what I'm doing.
So, I went back and looked at Matthew 5:7, where it talks about blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And again, a recovering Pharisee. And so, with that in mind, it's like, oh my goodness, the realization of who I am and what God's done for me, and I want to be shown mercy, and so therefore, even looking at the Pharisees, we would have such a bigger impact on them, or even the Romans, that took over them, if we could just show them all mercy and compassion and get out of our way and be who we are for God and let God do the work in others' hearts.
I think that's exactly what's being said in Matthew. Let God work on your heart.
That's not the easy part. That's the hard part. It's easy to follow the rules. It's easy to know the scriptures. To let him get in there and mess with your heart, that is hard.
That is the very hard part.
But when you do, there is such a burden released. And we don't have to keep those rules. I mean, yes, they're there. They're guidelines. They're awesome. They're great. God did it for a reason. And so if he can mess with, if we can get out of the way and let him mess with our heart, which is, yes, that's so hard. But man, whew, that burden comes
And that's what this burden is. You can learn to live freely and lightly. And I like this translation because it gets rid of the word yoke. Because we're not in a farming culture. We don't understand much about yoke anymore. But let me read you another version of this to kind of close out. It says, "Come to me, all of you who are distressed and overloaded, and I will allow you rest. Put my symbol of enslavement around your neck and attach yourself to me, because I am gentle and I'm humble in heart, and you will find peace in your inner being. For the slavery I give you is pleasant, and the load I give you is light." We can be released from slavery by knowing that God is merciful. And when we understand God is merciful, we are not a slave to the law of Moses anymore. We hold up God's law and we say, yes, I want to behave in a different way, but I want to behave with mercy and compassion.
What is that version that you're reading?
You know, that's a great question. I knew you were going to ask that, and I have looked all around for this version, and I can't find it. I'm quoting from Gary Collier, who wrote a book, The Forgotten Treasure, and he uses this version, and I haven't found out from Gary what version that is.
Let us know.
Yeah, I'd really like to know, for I really like that. It kind of makes it hard. The other place, let's go to chapter 9, just briefly.
I empathize fully with what's been said this morning about our hearts, and not being burdened with the details of Phariseeism and so forth. But I really feel in my heart that I have to be very careful in embracing that to the point where I'm going to end up in another ditch, like looking at speed limits as a suggestion rather than the law. I don't think that's right.
And see, that's what Jesus...
Right means I stay out of trouble.
Well, and see, that's exactly what Jesus is trying to help us avoid. When he's saying, yeah, I'm telling you what the law is, and that's important that you follow the law. But there are going to be circumstances in your life that you're going to come across, and mercy is more important than that law. I'll tell you this, when my triplets were being born, and they loaded Georgia into the helicopter at Lutheran Hospital because they couldn't deliver premature babies at that time at Lutheran, so they had to take them to Colorado General. They loaded her in the helicopter. I watched them take the gurney off and put her in the helicopter. I got in my car. I drove to the CU Med Center, which at that time was on Colorado Boulevard and 9th Avenue. And I was able to watch them unloading the helicopter when they got there. And I wasn't driving a fancy car. But I'm going to tell you that the limit didn't matter much to me then. Jesus overrides the law to apply mercy. I was going to go another place. I don't have time. Next week, we're going to deal with the birth story, because it's Christmas after all. And I will ruin your Christmas for you. But I'm going to tell you that we have done a terrible job with the birth story, the way Matthew presents it. And I am going to tear apart your Christmas piece by piece. So be here